The Green Bay Packers 2024 season ended in disappointment. With that said, this team still has a lot of things to go through, so in this video, we're going to go ahead and do the Green Bay Packers mock off season. But if you guys do go on to enjoy the video, make sure you guys hit the like and subscribe button because it would mean a lot for me. Let's hop into the video. So the way the video is going to work is we're going to be doing everything that the Green Bay Packers are going to be doing this off season. We're going to begin by managing their finances in the team assets portion of the video. Then we'll talk about some of their team free agents, who we're going to re-sign and who we're going to let walk. Next, we'll talk about some team needs, what positions they need to look to address, and then we'll talk about my free agency plan, and then lastly, we'll be doing 2 3-round mock drafts. With that said, we are going to begin with, as I mentioned, the team assets portion of the video. Now, fortunately for the Green Bay Packers, their financial situation is pretty darn good. Given the fact this team just paid their quarterback, has a couple big contracts, you would think the Packers would be in a situation where their finances are not in a good position, but as we sit here today, they have $42 million in open cap space, and by the end of this, we can open up a lot of extra cap space. Now, this team does have a few extensions they need to look to hand out. You're looking at guys like Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, who are also looking for contract extensions, but ultimately I decided not to extend them. Rather, I'm going to prioritize the offensive line, beginning with Zach Tom, who, if we do extend his contract, does open up $1.5 million in 2025. In terms of what contract I'm thinking, I decided to match the contract of Christian Darrisaw, which is a $26 million APY. For Zach Tom, you could play him all across the offensive line, whether it's left tackle, right tackle, guard. Sure, he could probably even play center. So I'm thinking a 4-year, $104 million deal is likely somewhere along the lines of what he's going to get. I also wanted to extend Rasheed Walker, who in a lot of ways is also a very good tackle, mainly a left tackle. I don't know if he has the flexibility of a Zach Tom, but he's still a hell of a player, and I wanted to pay him potentially around top 10-ish money for his position. So in terms of the contract, I'm going to be giving him around a 4-year, $78 million deal, which puts him at $19.5 million. That takes him just outside the top 10 as like the 11th highest paid left tackle. By extending him, he also will open up an additional $1.5 million as well. Now, there are a couple restructure candidates, and we're going to be restructuring 2 big-time contracts. Those are going to be Rashawn Gary and Xavier McKinney. Both of these players are very young, going to be on the team for quite a couple years, so it did make some sense to just open up their cap space just a tad bit more so we can be a bit more aggressive this offseason. Rashawn Gary's restructure opens up $10 million, and Xavier McKinney's contract restructure opens up $7 million. Now, I only have one player that I'm going to be cutting, and that is, of course, going to be Jair Alexander. There has been a lot of speculations regarding whether or not they're going to keep him, they're going to move off of him. Obviously, one healthy Jair Alexander is a really solid corner and is one of the best in the league, but unfortunately, he's at that stage in his career where he is struggling to stay healthy, and again, when he's on the field, he's great, but he's just not consistently on the field. By post June 1st cutting Jair Alexander, you would open up an additional $17 million in cap space. So with that said, by cutting Jair Alexander, extending Zach Tom, Rasheed Walker, and restructuring Rashawn Gary and Xavier McKinney, we go from $42 million all the way up to $79 million in 2025. Now, do keep in mind that there are some big-time contracts we still are having to work with, like Zach Tom's new contract, Rasheed Walker's new contract, Jordan Love's new contract. So while we can give out some long-term deals, we can't go too over the top. Hopefully, you guys know what I mean. But with that said, let's now talk about some of the team free agents. And fortunately for the Green Bay Packers, they really do not have too many massive free agents that we need to look to bring back. They have a very short list of only a handful of players, those players being Josh Myers, Isaiah McDuffie, Eric Stokes, Eric Wilson, TJ Slayton, Brandon McManus, AJ Dillon, Andre Dillard, and Corey Ballantyne. Obviously, not a bunch of key players there, but there are a few players we do want to bring back. For starters, the biggest conversation point of the offseason in terms of their personal team free agents is going to be on Josh Myers. Based off everything that I've read, it does sound like the front office really does like Josh Myers, but the play on the field leaves a little bit to be desired. He consistently ranks as one of the worst starting centers in the NFL. So because of that, I think I'm going to go ahead and just let him walk. I'm going to prioritize probably drafting or bringing some in free agent who I think is a much better player. The other conversation point is Isaiah McDuffie, who has been kind of a good starter for this team the past couple years, but with the presence of Adrian Cooper and some other young players, I think we can go ahead and let Isaiah McDuffie leave because he is a tad bit older, and in terms of play on the field, he's a good run stuffer, but coverage-wise leaves a little bit to be desired. But with that said, we are of course going to be bringing back Brandon McManus on a 2-year, $4 million deal. He is arguably their most important free agent because of how bad the special teams has been for Green Bay the past few years. He came in last year, played really well, and does look to be their kicker moving forward. And then outside of that, we're going to bring back a bunch of just depth options. Guys like TJ Slayton on a 2-year, $4 million deal. Eric Wilson on a 1-year, $4 million deal. Corey Ballantyne on a 2-year, $3 million deal, and Andre Dillard on a 1-year, $2 million deal. Most of these players are rotational depth options. Some of those guys are special teams. None of those guys are going to be key foundational players of our team. Those are just simply depth, rotational, special teams players I wanted to bring back. So after signing a couple of those players, we went from $79 million now down to $67.5 million, which is more than enough money to get through free agency. That is a crap ton to work with. But with that all said, let us now hop into the team needs portion of the video. In this portion, we're just going to talk about what positions they need to look to address in free agency or in the draft. And from my personal standpoint, the one position they have to look to address is, of course, the edge rushing room. Lucas Van Ness hasn't really turned out to be the player they drafted him to be. Last year in 2024, he had a pass rushing grade of 65.5 via PFF and a run defense grade of 45.2, only 4 sacks, 19 solo tackles, 7 assisted tackles, and that was on over 400 snaps. And just so far, he hasn't really lived up to his first round pick. I'm not saying he's a horrible player who shouldn't be given time on the field. No, obviously he's still a young player who's still developing. So you do want to give him time to, grow and become a better player. But ultimately, this team is trying to win now. So we have got to look to address a pure edge rusher one. Rashawn Gary is obviously the big paid guy, the guy that you want to be your true edge rusher one. But truth be told, he hasn't quite lived up to that standard. Not saying he's been bad. He's been really good, just not quite like the 12 to 15 sack per season type of guy. He's not like a top 10 edge rusher, which is what I thought that he potentially could become. He still had 8 sacks last year, had a pass rush grade of 66.3 and a run defense grade of 75.3. So again, very solid player, but you want a little bit more from that position room. So maybe we look to get something in the draft, or maybe we can find something in the offseason. Next is going to be a cornerback. Arguably, this is maybe a bit of a bigger need than an edge rusher, because at least with edge rushers, you have Rashawn Gary. Right now, your secondary in terms of corners is looking pretty darn weak. Your safety duo of Evan Williams and Xavier McKinney, not to mention Javon Bullard, can also get down and get into that safety position too, is extremely strong, and you have to feel really optimistic about the future of that position. But outside of that, your starting corners outside of Jair Alexander is Carrington Valentine, Keyshawn Nixon, Javon Bullard, Eric Stokes, if you decide to bring him back. None of those players, in my opinion, really inspire a bunch of confidence within me. So we have got to look to bring in a true, ideally cornerback one or really quality cornerback two to play at a high level for this team. And I do think that there are a couple options out there, by the way. Next is a wide receiver. This team has, and I kind of like to say this whenever I talk about the Packers, this team has a bunch of really good wide receiver threes or borderline wide receiver twos, but they don't have a single wide receiver one. What I mean by that is Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, Bo Melton. Those are all wide receiver twos or wide receiver threes, or in the case of some players, wide receiver fours. They don't have that true alpha number one guy. Now, I do want to say this. There have been some speculations about potentially Davante Adams joining this team, but for the sake of the video, I just do not know what's going to happen with the New York Jets, and I just do not know what's going to happen with Davante Adams. So I'm not even going to try to speculate that within this video. If they can get Davante Adams, by all means, I think they should do so. He is a hell of a player, and he would give this team a true wide receiver one. But because there's so much unknown to this, I just decided not to include him in the video. You could also potentially throw in Cooper Kupp's name in here as well. I don't know if at this stage of his career, though, he's much of a wide receiver one. Next is going to be a center. Because we let go of Josh Myers, you're probably looking at Elton Jenkins probably taking over that center position, and then hopefully Jordan Morgan can play that left guard position. Obviously, he dealt with a bunch of injuries this year, so it was a bit unfair to kind of judge him from his rookie season. But if you are okay with that, then your offensive line should be fine. But ideally, I don't think that starting Elton Jenkins at center is a good move. I believe we saw him sparingly at that position, and it was not pretty. So if we can find an upgrade for the center position, by all means, I think we should do so, and then just have Jordan Morgan be a plug and play player. Maybe he starts at guard, or maybe he's just a swing tackle. Next is the interior of the defensive line. Again, we have some players here who I feel okay with. Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, TJ Slayton. You feel pretty decent about those guys, but if I can find an upgrade in that positional room or find another rotational body who I think can be a difference maker, by all means, I do think I would definitely be looking to address that. But outside of that, this team is really complete. It just has a couple of big time needs on the defensive side of things that I would love to look to address in free agency. And so with that said, let's talk about my free agency plan. Now, I do want to reiterate something I said a bit earlier. Because we have so many bigger contracts coming up, like Jordan Love's, Zach Tom's, Rashawn Gary's, Xavier McKinney, we can't go too borderline crazy with like massive 4-year deals. For the most part, I'm going to try to stick within around 3-year deals and under, because I do think that that is really the main championship window for this Packers team. I still think their window is as big and open as any team in the NFL, but I think these next 3 years are going to be 3 pivotal years for them to try to get that championship while Jordan Love is still on a fairly affordable contract. So that brought me to a free agency plan that I am extremely proud of, and I'm extremely excited to see what Packers fans have to say about it. It's really a defensive focused free agency class, but I did bring in a couple, well, I should say one offensive player who I think will be a difference maker. I guess because he's only one offensive player, we're going to go ahead and talk about it. I decided to bring in a center in Drew Dalman on a 3-year, $33 million deal. He is going to be our center moving forward, and hypothetically speaking, if Drew Dalman is signed, your offensive line is going to be Rasheed Walker, either Jordan Morgan or Elton Jenkins, Drew Dalman at center, and then kind of the same conversation here, Sean Ryan or potentially Jordan Morgan at right guard, and then Zach Tom at right tackle. That offensive line to me seems really, really solid. You also have your swing tackle and Andre Dillard, and then of course, whatever you want to do in Jordan Morgan, if he can improve in year 2, this offensive line should be straight up nasty. Via PFF, Drew Dalman had an overall grade of 78.8, a run blocking grade of 79.8, and a pass blocking grade of 66.6. On over 500 offensive snaps, he only had 3 penalties and only gave up 2 sacks. This is the type of guy that I think would be the finishing touch on what should be an awesome offensive line for the Green Bay Packers. Jordan Love is going to have a really good offensive line in front of him. Now he just needs to find a wide receiver 1. This offense should be really good next year. But outside of that, we're going to focus a lot of our attention on the defensive side of things, as I mentioned, and we're going to talk about one of my bigger contracts, and that's going to be Josh Sweat. Now, I know Josh Sweat is coming off an excellent, and I mean excellent, performance in the Super Bowl, and there is going to be a lot of teams interested in his services. But if you are Josh Sweat, and if you want to go and contend on a team like the Green Bay Packers, I think you might be willing to take maybe a smidge less than a team like, let's say, the Carolina Panthers, who might be willing to give him an extra $1 million or so. If I'm Josh Sweat, if I want to contend for a championship, why would I want to go to a team like Carolina? I would rather go to a team like Green Bay. Now, granted, I do not know Josh Sweat. For all I know, this could be a guy who wants an absolute bag, and if that's the case, then by all means, go for it. You have absolutely deserved it this year. But if he wants to continue to contend, Josh Sweat on a 3-year, $54 million deal does make a little bit of sense. Josh Sweat would give this team another pass rusher next to Rashawn Gary that would just put nightmares on defense, on offensive lines. Your starting 4 would be Rashawn Gary, Josh Sweat, Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, and then behind them will be guys like TJ Slayton, Lucas Van Ness, and potentially whoever else we draft or pick up in the offseason. I do believe by bringing in Josh Sweat, it would be worth the investment because you are basically fixing your defensive line. You're getting more pressure on the quarterback. Not to mention Edgerrin Cooper, he can do some blitzes himself. I mean, he can be kind of a Frankie Louvu type guy sometimes. So I think by bringing in Josh Sweat, that's really the big bucket guy who I think is just going to make so many splash plays for this team. I'm going to stick to the defensive line here. And again, I talked about the interior defensive line being a bit of a priority for me, whether it's finding a true starter or finding another rotational body. I think I found somebody who's fairly affordable, who is actually within the division. So we'll see if this is even realistic, but we're going to be bringing in Levi Onwuzurike. I'm sorry if I mispronounced his name, on a 2-year, $18 million deal. Now, via PFF, he has an overall grade of 69.4, pass rush grade of 67.1, and a run defense grade of 64.1. In 2024, he had a total of 45 pressures, 3 sacks, 21 solo tackles, 1 forced fumble. This guy was a really key rotational piece for that Detroit Lions. Now, I will say if Aiden Hutchinson was healthy all year, I do think Levi's numbers would probably be a lot better because of the presence that Aiden Hutchinson brings. I think if he were to join this defensive line, you would have 4 guys who can all get to the quarterback, who can all stuff the run, and are all just elite playmakers. Like, this defensive line would go from being really bad to, in my opinion, one of the better units in the NFL really quickly. I wanted to shore up the defensive line. It was probably my biggest priority of the offseason, and I think that both of our lines of scrimmages, whether it's Drew Dalman, Josh Sweat, or Levi, has gotten significantly better. Now, in terms of the secondary, there weren't a bunch of incredible options in free agency for who I was like, yeah, this guy makes a ton of sense, but there was one name who I felt like he made enough sense to where I wanted to bring him in, and that was going to be DJ Reed on a 3-year, $42 million deal, arguably the best corner out there on the market, at least in this year's free agency. By bringing in DJ Reed, I don't know if I get a cornerback 1. I'll just say that right now, but I might be getting a really excellent cornerback cornerback 2 and arguably a decent cornerback 1. Obviously, your secondary is far from complete. I would love to add another younger body in the draft, but by bringing in DJ Reed, you have somebody who you feel pretty confident in moving forward as your potential cornerback 1, or more ideally, a great, fantastic cornerback 2. DJ Reed is 28 years old, so by the time his contract is up, he will be around 31 or 32, depending on when his birthday is. He's a little bit on the shorter side, but has been a fantastic player for the New York Jets basically his entire tenure there. He had an overall grade of 70.7, coverage grade of 70.1, and run defense grade of 71.8. In 2024, only gave up 35 receptions. Now, he's not the ball hawk that you would ideally like Jair Alexander can get you interceptions. DJ Reed really isn't that guy, though he is capable of doing so, but that's exactly why you have guys like Evan Williams, Javon Bullard, and of course, Xavier motherfucking McKinney. Lastly, I wanted to bring in a veteran potentially to play in the nickel. Now, the nickel position is a bit interesting for the Packers because you already do have guys like Keyshawn Nixon who can play that role, or you also have Javon Bullard who played there occasionally this year, so I didn't view it as a priority, but I did want to bring in a veteran who in a pinch can play on the outside, but ideally would probably stick inside to play more of that slot corner if you need him to. I brought in Jonathan Jones, who I think of all the players I brought in free agency, this one might be the most unrealistic because he kind of feels like he's going to be remaining on the Patriots his whole career. But if he does decide to leave, I do think a team like the Green Bay Packers would be interested in his services because he can play again as your cornerback 3/4. He could be a rotational body. He is a little bit older, but when he's on the field, he's still a heck of a player. 1 year, $4 million deal. It's not an expensive contract, nor is it a long-term deal. I just think it made a little bit of sense to bring him in on a short-term deal to see if potentially we can get something out of him. So to kind of recap my free agency plan on offense, we brought in Drew Dalman on a 3-year, $33 million deal. He's going to be our starting center and really just make this offensive line complete. On defense, we brought in Josh Sweat, Levi Onwuzurike on a 3-year deal for Josh Sweat and a 2-year deal for Levi. To fix our secondary, we also brought in DJ Reed on a 3-year deal and Jonathan Jones on a 1-year deal. After all those contracts, we went from $67.5 million in cap space to now around $11.5 million in leftover cap space. I'm thinking with this money, this is just going to go to focusing on paying special teams players, playing rotational players. This is not going to be probably any more big-time contracts. This is money just for rotational depth options for the rest of the team. But with that said, let's now go ahead and hop into our 2 3-round mock drafts. All right, but as you can see, we are on the PFF mock draft simulator. The Green Bay Packers have pick number 23, and we're in a really interesting situation because I feel like we addressed so many of our needs. We addressed the center position, we addressed the defensive line, we addressed the secondary in some ways. I feel like the biggest leftover need that we did not look to address was the wide receiver position, and with the way the board fell here, Matthew Golden very well could be my pick here. Now, I do want to give an extra shout out to a few players who are already still on the board, like Armand Membu, who I think can play guard or tackle, but we fixed the offensive line in so many great ways. Gray Zabel, kind of the same story here. Nick Scourton, he's fallen down a little bit on PFF, but he's a hell of a player. The one player I really want to give a big shout out to would be Jahdae Barron. He can play the nickel, he can play outside, he can play safety. I'm a huge Jahdae Barron fan, and in fact, more than likely in our second mock draft, I'll probably be taking Jahdae Barron. Spoiler alert, but because wide receiver is such a big positional need, Matthew Golden, I think, will be the pick here. Now, Matthew Golden, around 6 foot, 6'1". I think he's a little bit on the shorter side, kind of built kind of similar to like Jamar Chase, but maybe not as bulky. Now, statistically speaking, these numbers don't blow you away. Only 987 yards this year, 419 with Houston, 584 with Houston. Never had these great PFF grades, but the way that he ended the season off with Texas was almost magical. I mean, he made every single catch. He was Quinn Ewers' go-to guy on an offense, by the way, that has guys like 5-star Ryan Wingo, DeAndre Moore, who's a high-level 4-star. Jonte Cook was on the team. Hopefully he's getting better. If you know, you know. And then, of course, Isaiah Bond, who was a projected first-round pick coming into the season, but now is all the way down to like potentially a 3rd or 4th-round pick because of how badly Matthew Golden outplayed him. That, and of course, injuries also kind of screwed Isaiah Bond. I actually would have liked to have seen him return for another season in college, but it is what it is. Matthew Golden is an elite route runner with elite hands. Doesn't have elite size like an Alec Ayamanor does, but with your wide receiver 1, you want somebody that you can just trust. He has sure hands, great route route runner, will get open. And I think you pair him next to guys like Christian Watson, who could be a bit more of your burner. By the way, Matthew Golden is incredibly fast too. Romeo Doubs can be a bit more of your deep threat. Jaden Reed can play more in the slot. Matthew Golden would be the guy who could be Jordan Love's go-to guy. So I'm going to go with Matthew Golden here. I think he'd be an awesome fit for this team. Unfortunately, I would love to get like a Luther Burden in that position or potentially like a Tet McMillan, but I think Matthew Golden totally gets the job done. So I'm back up at pick 55, and I do see a couple players who I am extremely interested in, like potentially a Derek Harmon. When I look in the cornerbacks, none of them fell to me here at pick 55. I will say Maxwell Harrison and Azariah Thomas have gotten some second round, first round buzz, but I don't know if I feel terribly confident taking them here. I do think if we potentially were to wait in the third round, I could potentially get a Maxwell Harrison or Azariah Thomas, or even like a Mello Dotson, Kobe Bryant, who I would also feel okay with. Zay Alexander's down there too. I could potentially look at Derek Harmon here, who I think is what I'm leaning towards right now. Maybe I even go with linebacker here as well. There should be some decent linebackers on the board. Chris Paul Jr., Jeffrey Bassa, Kobe King is also here. Maybe not actually. There's not really a linebacker who I'm in love with. I think I'm going to go Derek Harmon. Now, Kenny Clark is getting a little bit older. Devontae Wyatt hasn't quite turned into the player they thought they were going to be getting. TJ Slayton is a bit more expendable. And then, of course, you brought in Levi, who I think will probably be your starter. Derek Harmon is somebody who is having an incredible 2024 season, is 310 pounds, 6'5", only a junior. 5 sacks this year, 43 hurries. Again, big 2024 breakout year. More of an interior defensive lineman, more so than like an exterior, like an edge rusher. So I think Derek Harmon might be my pick here because he's kind of, in my opinion, the best player available in a somewhat position of need. We could also look at edge rushers here too, like a Jordan Burch, Jared Ivey, Josiah Stewart. All of those players could be considered here, but Derek Harmon, in my opinion, is the best of the bunch. So we're going to go ahead and take Derek Harmon, best player available in a somewhat position of need. We're back up at pick 87, and corner is still a really big need for us. Unfortunately, a lot of those top corners, we talked about it a bit earlier, like Azariah Thomas and as well as Maxwell Harrison, went a few picks before us, which is a bit unfortunate, but I do think we are in a position here to potentially take a Mello Dotson or a Kobe Bryant. Trying to see what else is on the board here. Mason Taylor, Trey Harris, Dion Walker, Andrew Makuba is also on the board, who I could see potentially using him more as a corner, more so than safety, but I think he's best suited as a safety. I think I'm probably going to go with the corner here, even if it does feel like a little bit of a reach. Mello Dotson is on the board, 6'1", 190. Had a decent year, sticky in man coverage, good in zone, but I don't know. Kobe Bryant is also on the board here. He is a oddly shaped human, 6'1", 175. I think he has the potential to stick at safety or play in the nickel because of how good he is as a run defender. Zay Alexander has also been kind of up and down draft boards lately. Like, people have had him as early as a second round pick. Some people have him more as a third or fourth round pick. Coverage grade of 81.1, man coverage grade of 65.1, zone coverage grade of 80.1. Kind of, I think, would be a good fun fit for this team. Unfortunately, I'm just not really seeing anything that's like mind blowing me away here. So I think just ultimately I might reach on a cornerback here. And of the corners available, I think Kobe Bryant gives you potentially the most versatility to use him in different roles, and I think he has the highest upside. So I think I'm going to go with Kobe Bryant here. All right, but this was the first of our 2 3-round mock drafts. Let's now hop into the next one. All right, but we are back up on the board at pick 23, and the draft board fell almost essentially the exact same way as last time. I talked about this last time. I'm going to go ahead and take Jahdae Barron. Now, Jahdae Barron is somebody who can play in the slot, can play in the nickel, can play on the outside, or can even play at the safety. He just has the versatility of a cornerback that you will absolutely fall in love with. You pair him with, hypothetically, DJ Reed and then whoever you want at that nickel position. I think Jahdae Barron is going to work in the NFL. I've talked about him for so many different teams in the mock drafts that I've done so far. Hell, I think if you watched my last mock offseason, I took Jahdae Barron for the 49ers, and that was as early as pick 11. I am so unbelievably high on Jahdae Barron. I know I'm a Texas fan, and I know people are going to say that I'm biased towards him, but objectively speaking, I think that Jahdae Barron is a better player than a lot of players on the board here. So I'm taking Jahdae Barron. Go watch the tape. Go watch the film. This dude is ridiculously good. Back up at pick 55, and again, the board fell very similar to how it did last time, but I think this time I might look to add a wide receiver here. Now, Trey Harris is on the board here. I think he's a little bit underranked by PFF, though I can definitely understand why. He does leave a little bit to be desired in terms of a route runner, but his past 2 years, he grades out very well, has productivity on his side. Effort and route running need to get fixed, but I think Trey Harris has the potential to be a very good player. We could also look at the edge rushing room here, and kind of similar board here fell for us. Josiah Stewart of the bunch here is probably the best. Jared Ivey could even be played as an interior defensive tackle. I do not think he's a very good fit for this defense. Jordan Birch, kind of similar, 295, 6'6", kind of could play inside or outside. I don't know if he's quite the fit. Josiah Stewart does give you the more 6'1", 245 frame, needs to put on a little bit of weight, but has the productivity, 91.2 overall grade, 27.3 pass rush win rate, plays outside the tackle. I think Josiah Stewart would probably be the best fit here for this team. But again, I think wide receiver is such a positional need here. Maybe in this situation, you'd go after a Devontae Adams, but I don't know if you have the cap space for it. Could look at cornerback here. Maxwell Harrison is on the board, but we obviously took Jade Barron. So I think I'm going to go ahead and take Trey Harris here. Of the players available, I don't think Jalen Royals is going to be a wide receiver one. Isaiah Bond, no either. Tej Johnson isn't either. Of the guys available, I think Trey Harris has the best chance of being that true alpha go-to guy. Has the size, the frame, the speed, the athleticism that you want from a player. It's all technique and just getting him to put in the work that I think is going to be what you want to see from him. And I think he has the potential to be a very good player. Not saying he's DK Metcalf or AJ Brown like, but in terms of size and frame, he does have that prototypical Ole Miss look to him. Could be seen as a little bit of a reach there, but I do think PFF has him a little bit underrated there. We're back up on the board at pick 87, and again, I want to look at potentially adding an edge here. Cayman Ruckers on the board. I do like Cayman Rucker, 265, 6'2", pass rush run rate of 18.1, 60.7 run defense grade is really what you're not happy with, I guess you could say. Deon Walker's on the board. We talked about him earlier. I think maybe this time, this is such an ugly spot here. I would honestly consider trading out of this one because there's just nobody here who I'm like in love with. Maybe I could go Ashton Gillette here. Has the productivity the past 2 years, has been very solid, very strong. 6'3", 275. Pass rush run rate of 20.9. True pass rush grade of 90.9, and a pass rush grade in general of 89.9 with a run defense grade of 78.0. Very high grades for Ashton Gillette. I think I'm gonna go ahead and take him. He's somebody who I've heard some second round buzz with. He would give you an extra body in the room, so I think it would make a little bit of some sense. But as you can see, this is our second of our 2 3-round mock drafts. But let me know your thoughts down below on my mock off season for the Green Bay Packers. And if you enjoyed, hit the like and subscribe button. Love you guys. Peace.